So let's talk about what's happened with the marijuana laws since they started becoming more and more prevalent across the United States. So, what happened was the 2018 Farm Bill came along and it said that hemp products were legal. Okay, hemp products have less than 0.3% THC in them, but they look the same as marijuana. So, with that being said, there was no real way to distinguish the two. And because there's still some THC in a cannabis plant, any roadside testing, we like throw it down in a little tube and we test it with a little test strip and it's going to come back positive for THC. So people were being arrested for possession of THC when it was actually a legal hemp product. So testing for THC impairment is complex. It's almost impossible. We don't have any roadside tests. And if you can find a test for impairment, you would be rich. The rights of people on the road outweigh the privileges of smoking. And we don't have an oral fluid test that's been completely approved by state police or that's going to be admissible in court. That's what we're trying to do. Being tested on a voluntary basis only, it takes about 5 to 10 minutes to collect a sample from a person's tongue, but it would give us an immediate result in about 5 minutes if there is a presence of a certain drug in somebody's system. And while it might detect the presence of pot, police and toxicologists say that there's no way of knowing what that presence means in terms of level of intoxication. Unlike alcohol, which is just one chemical consumed in one way and that leaves your body in a predictable way, marijuana is complex. Cannabis is not just one chemical, it's multiple chemicals. We can think of THC as the chemical that intoxicates people, but we don't know if that's necessarily true. And then to add to the complexity, marijuana stays in our system for a longer period of time than alcohol would. And, lawmakers have determined certain levels for marijuana impairment, but those numbers are arbitrary. They're not backed by science. And so, with marijuana being legalized in several states and, medicinal use being legalized here in Georgia, the law is outpacing science and the police are just not ready for it. We can't rely on technology to get us where we need to be at this moment. So for the time being, training of the police is the best way to kind of determine if someone is too impaired to drive or not. Even doctors agree that even if the tests become more accurate, it's unlikely they're going to alone hold up in court. And, people feel really entitled to smoke weed. Non-smokers have the right to clean air with cigarettes, but not with marijuana. They can't say anything to somebody smoking weed in Colorado because the weed smokers are quick to cite their rights to smoke. So let's talk about what happened in Colorado after they legalized recreational use. They had it for medicinal use, but then they legalized it for recreational use. So at the time that I created this PowerPoint, there were 549 retail marijuana stores throughout the state of Colorado. And in that year, medical cannabis sales breached $1 billion. So let's look at some of the statistics and what it means for the future of the cannabis industry in Colorado. So let's look at marijuana sales and tax revenue. Financially, Colorado benefited from 5 years of legal marijuana sales. And since the market's launch, that state has experienced a really higher than expected marijuana sales and tax revenue. So the total marijuana sales in the state grew from about 683.5 million in 2014 in the recreational market in that first year to 1.28 billion in the first 10 months of 2018. So I did this in 2019. So the year's sales totals were expected to exceed $1.5 billion in 2019. So these retail sales of cannabis translated into a significant tax revenue for the state. That tax revenue tripled over the 5-year period from 67.6 million in 2014 to almost 245 million in the first 11 months of 2018. That's a lot of money. So even with that sales tax and revenue tripling in that 5-year period, there were 3 ways to tax, and 4 if you count the local cities. So there was a 2.9% sales tax on medical marijuana, a 15% special sales tax on recreational marijuana, and a 15% excise tax on retail marijuana. So let's kind of break this down. The sales tax on medical marijuana pours entirely into the state's marijuana tax fund, and then they distribute it all over the place to government functions like education, public health, construction, law enforcement, substance abuse prevention and services. And some of these funds did go to help open up and fund new mental health care clinics. And so that special sales tax gets divided between the general fund and a silo for local governments. And then the excise tax, that first 40 million goes to the school construction, and the remaining goes to the permanent fund for the public schools. But that's not all. The tax revenue distributions to the Colorado's Department of Education included 8.8 million for early literacy competitive grants, $16.5 million for school health professional grants, $4.9 million for school bullying prevention and education grants, $4.9 million for dropout prevention programs, and $30 million for the state public school fund. And the local municipalities that allow marijuana sales can also place their own tax on the marijuana. So the city of Denver dedicated $12.8 million towards education between 2014 and 2018. And that money was used to fund 8 different youth diversion programs and substance abuse prevention programs in 15 different schools. And the city also invested $4 million from marijuana tax dollars in 2018 to fix the aging parks and recreational centers, and an estimated $8 million each year for affordable housing funds, and $5 million for deferred capital maintenance. Pueblo County used its portion of the tax revenue that it collected from adult marijuana sales to fund college scholarships for its high school seniors. And interestingly enough, they awarded 210 students $420,000 in scholarships. So there's a book called Marijuana Sanity, and it talks about the federal law. So because of these federal laws against cannabis sales, these dispensaries and other marijuana-related enterprises can't keep money in the banks. So the businesses in Colorado, it's all about cash. Hundreds and millions of dollars just floating around in cash, and they can't really call the feds, if somebody robs them. Well, they can call the police because of the local laws, but the point here is that it's federally illegal. So federally backed banks can't take the money. So they have to do something with that money. I'd be interested to know what they are doing with that money. So let's talk about employment. There are 20,000 marijuana industry direct employed jobs, and about 23% of that number in additional ancillary jobs like construction and lawyers and security guards, consulting firms, etc. So as this industry has grown over that 5-year period, employment in the industry and the ancillary sectors also expanded. And then as of January 2019, Colorado had issued 41,796 individual licenses in the marijuana industry, including 1,637 business owners. And according to estimates from the Marijuana Policy Group, one active license equates to 0.467 full-time equivalent positions. That means that in Colorado's cannabis industry, it employs about 19,518 full-time equivalent staff. And in addition to that direct employment, the marijuana sector also created jobs in other sectors that support the industry. So from a 2016 report, the Marijuana Policy Group estimated that the ancillary jobs like security guards, construction, HVAC specialists, consulting, legal, advisory services, and other businesses equaled about 23% of that direct cannabis industry jobs in Colorado. Tourism also went up 51% in 2014. That's about 6.5 million people in 2016, equaling about 18 million cannabis transactions from those who visited. And that led to an increase in the homeless population, but that wasn't necessarily directly associated with the marijuana. But about a third of those who were incarcerated said that they were already homeless and they just came to Colorado specifically for the marijuana. And they did notice that crime rates fell. Well, obviously, if they decriminalized or legalized cannabis sales or possession, then they're not going to be arresting for it as much. So the arrests for marijuana possession fell 56%, obviously. The most common industry-related crime was burglary, which accounted for 57% of the crime. The violent and property crimes did increase, but whether it was related to the legalization of marijuana or not is still up for debate. The governor said that it's because of the growing seasonal transient population that keeps coming in, not necessarily the people that are already living there, but people coming to the state and committing these crimes. They did notice that medical marijuana use decreased. Oh, I don't have to get a medical card anymore. I can just do it without it. So that legalization of the recreational marijuana led to a drop in the number of people who were actually registered medical marijuana patients. And whether that was because it was just easier to get a recreational card or if it was more difficult to get a medical card, I don't know, but correlation does not equal causation. Just when the adult use marijuana sales launched in January of 2014, there were 111,030 patients in Colorado who possessed valid registry identification cards. But then as of November of 2018, that number dropped to 85,207. So it suggests that medical marijuana patients have started to abandon the program for the state's retail side. And participating in that state's medical marijuana program adds regulatory hurdles. Patients have to visit their physician every year to get a new recommendation and then pay that $25 application processing fee. And the convenience of recreational retail sales may be attractive to patients who are still using marijuana for therapeutic purposes, but obtaining it through the adult use market. They did notice that youth consumption of marijuana decreased. It was kind of a secondary benefit of that marijuana industry is that its impact on the rate of adolescent marijuana use. It kind of decreased it. A federal survey of data showed that teen marijuana use dropped in Colorado since the recreational marijuana was legalized. It's kind of that, oh no, don't touch it, and then they're going to touch it. Well, you can touch it, and they're like, good. So the percentage of high school students who use marijuana within the past month dropped 11% between the years of 2011 and 2017. Additionally, teens who reported ever having tried cannabis also fell 11% over that same period. And according to an October 2018 report from the Colorado Division of Criminal Justice, legal marijuana also has not impacted graduation rates or dropout rates in Colorado. And since 2012, graduation rates have actually increased while the dropout rates have decreased. So cannabis advocates argue that legalization helps curtail teen use by making marijuana more difficult to obtain. By hindering the illegal market and implementing serious penalties on regulated cannabis businesses for selling to minors, cannabis becomes less accessible to those who are underage. Kind of like what they did with cigarettes. They also noticed that opioid use decreased. Like everywhere else in the US, there's an opioid crisis in Colorado. So from 2000 to 2016, there were 4,027 people in Colorado who lost their lives to an opioid overdose. And that was according to the Colorado Department of Public Health and Environment. But the statistics suggest that the legalization of marijuana in Colorado has had a positive effect on opioid abuse. So they noticed that the opioid abuse had fallen since the legal recreational marijuana was allowed. A 2017 study published in the American Journal of Public Health found that opioid-related deaths decreased more than 6% in the 2 years following the state's recreational marijuana market that opened in 2014. And the authors examined trends in monthly opiate overdose fatalities in Colorado before and after that state's recreational marijuana market opened. And while several of those studies have shown a positive association between decreases in opioid use and medical marijuana legalization, the American Journal of Public Health was the first to look at the effects of recreational marijuana laws. Now, all of these dispensaries started popping up in Colorado, and everybody was like, yeah, we want this, we want this. They just didn't want it in their own backyard. It's that NIMBY, not in my backyard type of mentality. These dispensaries, because they can't get the federal funding and they can't get loans from the bank for them, they have to open up with their own cash reserves. And so they're typically going to open up in areas that have lower rent space, which are lower income areas. So there's 700 shops in Colorado, and you can look at this on weedmaps.com. But there's a guy that lives in an upper class area and takes 8 miles to go find weed. And he believes that these should be available to everyone. You know, if somebody moves to Colorado and they want to open a shop, they want to go to the bank and get a loan for $100,000 to pay staff and get the plants going and things like that. But the bank's not going to give them a loan because it's not federally legalized. So now they have to take their own money, go find a location that's in a cheaper area so that they can afford it. And most of these places just end up in these lower income areas anyway. And a lot of the upper class people kind of push back on it, and they're like, no, we don't want this in our neighborhood. We want it, but we don't want it in our neighborhood. So when we look at what's more expensive, the street versus the dispensary, obviously street marijuana is valued considerably less than the concentrated marijuana being sold in the dispensaries. That, and it's taxed more. So you're going to spend more money at the dispensary, but you're going to have a more regulated product. It's going to have exactly the amount of THC that you're looking for. It's going to be the exact amount. There's not going to be anything laced in it. You know and can trust the product coming from these dispensaries. Even though it's not regulated by the FDA because it's federally illegal, it's still known and trusted from these dispensaries because they are held to a certain standard by the state law. And they do use testing facilities to determine how much THC is in each product. And a lot of commercial growers don't really give a crap about anything other than the bottom line. The average weed plant uses between 2 and 5 liters of water every single day. And while the science isn't really exact, I just kind of like the simplicity of considering each weed plant growing in California as just another person sucking water up. There's a bunch of different huge grow operations that house hundreds or thousands of plants in just one warehouse. And so there's no environmental safeguards. Weed is water and power hungry. It doesn't grow naturally in most of the places that we're growing it in. So it is taking up lots and lots of energy and lots of water. So we have to think about that and the environmental impact that it's having when we are considering the marijuana industry. And I know we've all probably heard of 420, but not many people actually know where it came from. It's a numerical reference for marijuana that was started in 1971. It was a group of high school students who would gather at 4:20 in the afternoon to look for a field of marijuana to smoke. Someone had said, oh, there's a guy growing weed in this field and we're going to go look for it so we can get some. They never really found the field, but they continued to use that reference to indicate that they wanted to smoke or that they had marijuana or that they were high. And they had really close connections to a stagehand. One of the kids' uncles was a stagehand for the Grateful Dead. And he began using it in front of the Grateful Dead, and the Grateful Dead began using it, and then the term began to spread all over the country in relation to smoking marijuana, and it's now celebrated every April 20th as almost a national holiday. But even though 420 is National Weed Day, 421 is National Drug Testing Day, and 422 is National Unemployment Increase Day. Just joking. All right, if you guys want, you can order the instructional manual for the 8-hour marijuana awareness class if you want to offer that to your clients. And there's also a client handbook, and you can find the link to purchase these workbooks inside the lesson